Again, welcome to this morning's Water Legislator webinar. Colorado's watersheds support all of us. For the smoothness of webinar function and accessibility, attendees have been muted and video sharing has also been disabled. To preserve connectivity, we have over almost 300 registrants this morning, and we want to preserve our bandwidth. So please do add questions to the chat at any time. Time permitting, we will hold Q&A following all of our panelists' presentations. Audubon looks at landscape conservation through the lens of birds and is invested in healthy watersheds, rivers, and wetlands for birds and people. We work seamlessly with the Water for Colorado Coalition, as well as the Healthy Headwaters Working Group, to pursue goals that build resilience for our freshwater ecosystems and water supplies. We are all connected by water. In Colorado, we collaborate, innovate, and progress together towards our sustainable water future for people and the environment. The future of Colorado is dependent on clean, reliable water coming from healthy rivers and watersheds, and each of us are connected by it. Collectively, as a state, from residents to decision makers, we need to lean in, learn more, and participate in the decisions around our water resources. The decisions we make about water, watersheds, and river health impact all of Colorado. And with that, I would like to welcome Speaker of the House, Alec Garnett, to share with us remarks on the importance of Colorado's watersheds and opportunities to support them. Speaker Garnett, in addition to his leadership role in the House of Representatives, represents District 2, which covers Denver County. Speaker, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and I'd love to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Abby. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be with all of you this morning. What a great group. 300 participants is an amazing number of people online. So thank you for this opportunity just to jump on and talk about how important water is to the Colorado Legislature, and protecting our watersheds is to our state's economy, to our environment, and of course, to just maintaining the Colorado that we love so much. It's something that in my 8 years at the legislature, I'm in my 8th session, I've really seen a change in how we have been prioritizing protecting our watersheds and prioritizing our water and helping Colorado recover from some of the wildfires that we've seen. Just last year, we invested nearly $70 million to support wildlife or to support wildfire and flood mitigation efforts through the Colorado State Forest Service and the Department of Natural Resources. That is an unprecedented investment that the Colorado Legislature made in water. In House Bill 1260, we invested $20 million into the CWCB for the water plan implementation to make sure that we could get those dollars out to the roundtables and get those dollars out to making sure that those projects across the state were getting the funding that they need. And as we go into this year, we're seeing the same type of prioritization, the same type of excitement about making sure that we are investing the right amount of dollars and resources into protecting our waters and our watersheds. And we're doing that through a couple of different avenues. We received money from the federal government through ARPA, through the federal stimulus package that they passed last year, and the legislature and the governor's office, working with Director Gibbs, who's on with us today, and I just want to highlight his leadership and his guidance. I very much value our relationship and helping him. He helps us guide us to the right decisions at the legislature. We are going to invest additional resources this year that I think may surpass the amount of investment that we made last year of $70 million. We'll have to kind of wait to see, but what we have seen is that both caucuses in the state house and in the state senate know how important it is to invest those needed dollars across the state. Right now, there's a couple of bills that are making their way through the process. Senate Bill 28, which creates a fund to ensure Colorado remains in compliance with interstate groundwater compacts, as many of you, I'm sure, know, specifically in the Republican in the Rio Grande River districts. So those communities have been investing a lot of dollars, and the state needs to make sure that we make an investment as well to help stay in compliance and make sure that we don't see additional calls on that compact. we're seeing a ton of work on wildfire. From there's at least 3 or 4 bills that are in the system that go from providing matching funds to local governments to creating a wildfire mitigation resource and best practices grant. So the Colorado legislature is really going above and beyond to make sure that we are helping people across the state in every region meet the need, meet the moment that we are seeing right now. So I'm excited to be here. I'm really excited to just share a little bit of what the legislature's working on, and just know that you have a partner in me as Speaker of the House, and you have a partner in so many different legislators from across the state. What I will say is that protecting Colorado's water is not a Democratic idea. It's not a Republican idea. It is just a Colorado idea. And it is one issue that I am seeing more bipartisanship in than almost anything else. So it's an honor to work on these issues. I have just one more session in the state legislature, but I'm going to make sure that we make that investment this year, and that we build a legacy of making continued investments through the general fund and the Colorado Water Plan, and giving CWCB the resources they need to help get those dollars out across the state. So Abby, thanks so much for having me on. It's an honor just to share a little bit of what the legislature is working on.
Speaker Garnett, thank you so much for your time this morning. I know you have to run, but we are honored by your remarks and sharing your time with us. And so we thank you so much for your service to Colorado and wish you a great day.
Thanks, Abby. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now we'd like to turn it over to Director Dan Gibbs, who currently serves as the Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Natural Resources and Chair of the Interbasin Compact Committee. Prior to joining DNR, he served as a Summit County Commissioner, served in the Colorado House of Representatives and in the Colorado State Senate. In addition to all of Dan's profound work, he is a certified wildland firefighter and is affiliated with the ROSS system, through which he is on call to fight wildfires throughout the US. So thank you, Director Gibbs, for sharing your time with us this morning. And when you are ready, please go ahead with your remarks.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Abby, for that kind introduction. Really appreciate you and Audubon of the Rockies for organizing this really important forum. And also thanks some of the other partners too that put this on. Water for Colorado, I know the General Assembly, obviously with Speaker Garnett here, and thank my own department, Department of Natural Resources too. Yeah, as someone that lives in Summit County in a fire-prone community, and as you mentioned, I previously served as a Summit County Commissioner. One of my side jobs also when I was a legislator in the House and Senate was working as Summit County's wildfire mitigation specialist. So I used to literally go door to door, talk to people about the importance of defensible space, of making sure that they stacked up their firewood, farther away from their house, and make, various different recommendations on more or less fire-wise processes. So, these issues are very near and dear to my heart, to say the least. Wildfire, smoke, and post-fire flooding and debris flows impact literally everything that the Department of Natural Resources that we do. Obviously, it has impacts to wildlife, has impacts to water, has impacts to outdoor recreation. A couple of years ago, I was deployed on the Grizzly Creek fire. And I knew firsthand going in that, the city of Glenwood Springs, were really dependent on that Grizzly Creek drainage area. And so it was quite the experience, to say the least, to be, fighting a fire, being aware of my surroundings, and just understanding that this community is going to have a lot of work to do with a lot of, help from federal partners and state partners to make sure that water quality and quantity for the needs of that community would be met. We're definitely in the age of mega fires, and that's the term that fires are over 100,000 acres in scale. And the 2020 fire season was a great reminder for Colorado, frankly, that, we are one lightning strike away. We are one unattended campfire. And frankly, one more drought season as a result of climate change away from Colorado's next mega fire. And so we really need to be prepared as a state. So, I want to share with you what I think, should be what success looks like, and really what Colorado's wildfire policy should look like over the next decade. And I really think that it starts with, looking through a lens of protecting risk to life, property, and the environment. And the environment, to me, really is like critical infrastructure, and so fires, have a huge impact, obviously, on our natural landscapes, but watersheds and communities. And my hope is that as I'm the DNR director, that we take really meaningful steps to work with local communities, whether it's counties, municipalities, homeowners associations, to be more resilient, to recognize that we're going to see fire in the future. So Colorado's wildfire policy, I think, should support fire adapted communities and watersheds by substantially increasing the pace and scale of our wildfire risk mitigation programs, and really focusing not just on, I'd call it like random acts of restoration, but really focusing on those locations that we know we get the most bang out of the buck. So success means that we invest in our forests like natural infrastructure that they are. Everyone will bring a substantially more resources to the table to address this challenge, from private landowners to local governments to state and federal agencies. I want to emphasize that we can't provide resources for implementation alone, but that we need to invest in the human infrastructure as well. I can't tell you how critical it is to get projects off the ground. And we really need support like regional watershed groups or forest health collaboratives, wildfire councils, workforce development and forestry and fire protection. When I was Summit County's wildfire mitigation specialist, I depended heavily on our local Summit County Wildfire Council. And we also had a separate forest health collaborative group. But when you combine leadership, for example, from my personal experience, we had leadership from the environmental community that was a part of those communities. You had leadership from people that work in the forestry industry. You had leadership from Denver Water. You had Xcel Energy. You had local fire departments. You had city and county towns. That really made a meaningful impact when we were looking at landscapes that we needed to focus on. And without that, projects just would not get off the ground. So money is one thing, but getting the local buy-in is another whole thing. I also believe that success means that we need to look at identifying mutual priorities. And let's see, when was it? October of 2019, the governor signed a shared stewardship MOU with the Secretary of Agriculture. And that really sets together the framework in terms of making sure that we're all on the same page of the right landscapes that we need to focus on. Success for me also means that local governments across the state implement fire smart land use planning and local building codes. It also means really updating our community wildfire protection plans. Every community that's fire prone has to have a CWPP. Unfortunately, some communities have developed those CWPPs and really like put those on a shelf, and they just like don't really look at it. Other communities use that as a living, breathing document that really shapes the land use decisions that they decide on in their local communities. Summit County, where I live, it's definitely a living, breathing document. We actually did a process to have that, our CWPP, overlaid with our land use and development codes to make sure everything was consistent, because we learned that we had language in our CWPP that said you have to have defensible space. You had to, have Class A roofing. But then we noticed that our land use development codes required certain vegetation around homes. So it was totally in conflict with one another. I also believe strongly that our CWPPs really can take that next step. And some people call it CWPP square. We look at the watershed impacts. I think that's so critically important when we look at source water protection, to protect drinking water quality and infrastructure. Fortunately, my boss, Governor Polis, and thanks so much to Speaker Garnett that was here earlier, took action in 2021. And we saw about $88 million was allocated to support wildfire recovery efforts on our lands and waters. So for example, we saw Senate Bill 21-240 signed by Governor Polis on June 15th, 2021. That appropriated $30 million for our Colorado Water Conservation Board's Watershed Restoration and Flood Mitigation Grant Program. That's so critically important when you look at the landscapes that we have right now in Colorado for the post-fire situations. A lot of people are focused on what resources we put on the front end. We know that wildfires can cost easily $1 million a day, but it costs about $1,200 on average per acre to treat it for forest health. But when you bring in air resources and so forth, it's between $60,000 and $70,000 of cost. So putting emphasis on the front end is extremely important. Water Conservation Board also moved quickly and effectively with $22.2 million of available funds awarded year to date. So we're getting money out the door to areas that were impacted. For example, at the Cameron Peak Fire, at East Troublesome Fire, Calwood, which is just north of Boulder, and the Grizzly Creek burn areas. These funds leverage an additional $69 million of matching total funds for project values of $91.3 million. So that's really incredible to say the least. The bill further states that CWCB board shall expend up to $500,000 by December 31st, 2022 for statewide watershed analysis to investigate the susceptibility of life, safety, infrastructure, and water supplies to wildfire impacts. So as a result of that, we're now developing what's called our wildfire ready watersheds statewide susceptibility analysis. So we're working with local communities right now around the state to do this wildfire ready watersheds framework. And again, that's providing information on the front end, that's so critically important. And just to wrap up, I think that our state should be proud of the work we're doing across basins to build more fire resilient communities and watersheds. There's still a heck of a lot of more work to do. I really appreciate Speaker Garnett and other legislators that are making this a real priority. When I was a legislator, I was fortunate too. When you look at watershed protection and forest health and wildfire risk mitigation programs, it was never Republican or Democrat. It was all, we're all in this together. And I really just encourage, everyone to still have that philosophy that, we're all in this together as Coloradans. We all need to do what local communities can do for adding capacity, what they can do, what the state can do, and what the federal government can do to all come together. So thanks so much.
Director Gibbs, thank you so much for all of your work and for, as the mountain resident myself for nearly 15 years, we live wildfire season and wildfire mitigation. It's a way of life. So just thank you for all of your support in all of your roles for our wildfire capable, and we're just working towards a more sustainable future regards to wildfire preparedness and mitigation, and just thank you again. So next up in our presentation is Adam Jokerst. And Adam currently serves as the Deputy Director for Water Resources at the City of Greeley. He is a registered professional engineer and has worked on water resources projects throughout the Western US for over 12 years in both the private and public sectors. I witnessed Adam's presentation on managing drinking water supplies through forest, fire, and floods at Colorado Water Congress last summer, and I know you will find this information impactful. So thank you, Adam. When you're ready, please go ahead. Oh, and there's your one mute for the day. Here we go.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
It is not my last mute of the day, I promise. Thank you, Abby, and thank you, Audubon Rockies, for organizing this event. It's great to be with you this morning, and I'm happy to speak with you about some of the impacts Greeley Water and the rest of the cities in northern Colorado are facing following the Cameron Peak Fire. The Cameron Peak Fire burned in Larimer County in 2020. It was and is the largest Colorado wildfire. It burned nearly 209,000 acres, and over half of that was in the medium to high severity burn category. Over 90% of this fire burned on federal land, meaning our relationship with federal partners is very important. And it burned watersheds that provide water to cities such as Greeley, Fort Collins, Loveland, Windsor, and really most all northern Colorado cities and towns. And this is one of many fires that have burned in northern Colorado in recent years. In 2020, the East Troublesome Fire, which burned in the lower left-hand corner of this map, it burned 190,000 plus acres in Grand County. And then this is on top of two other fires that burned in 2012, the High Park and Hewlett Gulch fire shown in the upper right. Between the High Park, Hewlett Gulch, and Cameron Peak fire, just at 50% of the Poudre River watershed, which is the main water supply for Fort Collins, Greeley, and others, has now burned. In addition to the Poudre River, Greeley water gets its water supply from the Laramie, Big Thompson, and Colorado River basins. And we have 4 basins, and that was done specifically to provide redundancy in case we had one watershed that had issues. And we just never thought that in 1 year, 2020, we'd see forest fires in all 4 of those water supply basins, but we did. You know, often when there is a fire, the public's attention is on firefighting and suppression, on evacuations, and the hard work that goes in and bravery that firefighters show in protecting houses and lives. And we get these kind of dramatic photos, but for water providers, the emergency starts really when the fire goes out. And that's because what is left after the flames go out is this, a vast, really just moonscape of charred trees and soils. These fires burn so hot that it actually burns the soil and the subsoil, rendering the forest floor to just ash and dust. And that has some pretty severe consequences later when it rains over the burn area. Typically, like on the left, when we have rain over a healthy forest, the precipitation is slowed by vegetation, leaf litter, and soil, and that water is absorbed into the ground. But once that vegetation and soil is burned and the soil actually becomes hydrophobic, resisting water, runoff and consequently erosion increase significantly. On the Cameron Peak Fire, our models predict that the runoff and erosion will increase between 25 or between 5 and over 25 times what it was prior to the fire. And with these fires, the scale of impact is enormous. It's really hard to take in unless you're up in a plane or a helicopter. Illustrating these 2 photos, we're seeing just miles and miles as far as you can see of burned landscape. And at this scale, there's now tremendous risk of downstream flooding and risk to our water supplies that many of us rely on. One of the biggest risks we see as water providers is degraded water quality. After rainfall over the burn area, the river goes black, and not just slightly turbid, but crude oil black. And we're simply unable to treat this water. It would immediately clog up our water treatment plant. And as a result, we have to bypass this water and turn to the backup supply sources. Those backup sources are nice, but they only go so far. And so these types of events are a major risk to our water supply. And last year in 2021, rains over the burn area created water quality issues that required us to turn off our main supply for over 40 days. And we lost quite a bit of water. And even when the river is less than Pennzoil, we're still seeing higher turbidity, particles in the water, and that increases our treatment cost. And we're expected to see these impacts 5, 10, or even longer years into the future. Another consequence of fires is sedimentation to our reservoirs. So the the erosion brings all this sediment into our reservoirs. And we had 4 reservoirs in the burn area that now face this risk. Removing that sediment is often impossible, but even when it is possible, it's incredibly expensive. Those nutrients that sediment also carries nutrients into the reservoirs, which then lead to algae blooms. And that can create some pretty severe taste and odor issues with our water supplies. One of the biggest threats comes from debris flows. And this is a picture from Black Hollow Creek up the Poudre Canyon. Intense rainfall over a relatively small burn area can release an avalanche of burned trees, sediment, boulders. I mean, in this case, boulders the size of houses came off the hill slope and really devastated downstream property. This took out several homes and tragically killed 4 people. Debris flow pushed houses and cars, even propane tanks into the river, which for a water provider is very scary to have those contaminants in our water. It also destroyed a bridge and actually relocated the river up against Highway 14 and is causing a risk to the highway. So what do we as water providers do about it? We do several things, but one of the biggest is watershed mitigation. We mitigate that burned area. And our most effective mitigation strategy is aerial mulching. This is when a helicopter loads up a net of mulch and drops it from the sky over the burn area. And this mulch is not like the type you may see in the garden. It's long strands of heavy wood. And when it falls, it creates a strong mat on the ground. The mulch slows down the rainfall and prevents erosion, and it's been proven effective across the West following fires. What it's doing is holding the soil on the hill slope and eventually allowing vegetation to take root. Plant roots are what are ultimately going to stabilize the soil and recover the landscape from these fires, and we're just speeding up the process. This is just another picture of mulch being dropped from a helicopter. And in the background, you can see some of the yellow areas that have had these mulch drops. When we do aerial mulching, we very specifically define the areas to be mulched. We get on the ground and take GPS points. And then afterwards, we walk the mulch area and make sure we got good coverage. And when we do this, we're excluding areas that are too steep, too rocky, or where the severity is not so much that native plants are going to come back kind of on their own. So we're very surgical when we do this. This is a picture of a mulched area, and you can see that this mulch is forming that mat on the ground. Again, we're just holding soil in place. In addition to mulching, we employ other erosion control measures. The picture on the left are wattles. These are those tubes of straw that you see on the side of the highway during construction projects to prevent erosion. These are laid perpendicular to the hill slope, and they're catching sediment as it comes down off the hill. These are made of wood chips, and they have a biodegradable casing, so natural. Similarly, we install natural wood checks. These are just logs, very low tech, just logs placed in gullies. And again, we're just trying to catch that sediment and allow vegetation of these areas. So what have we done so far? In last year, we mulched 5,800 acres. We put in 1,800 feet of flood barrier bags protecting private homes and highways from flooding. We did some limited stabilization projects where we could around our reservoirs. We did quite a bit of work to protect the private property up the canyon. We addressed that Black Hollow debris flow. So first thing first, we got the houses out of the river. But we also provided some additional stabilization to protect other houses in that area. And then we've had many volunteer projects, dozens. And we really thank the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed and the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition for organizing a lot of this. Those volunteer projects are very small scale, but together they do add up. One thing to stress is that mitigation measures are costly. It costs us about $87 per helicopter per minute to do aerial mulching. So that works out to about $2,000 to $3,000 per acre of aerial mulching. And so for a fire of over 200,000 acres, this adds up to a very large sum. Of course, we're not mulching all 209,000 acres. We're very specific about what we do. We have prioritized our treatments and are doing mitigation on just those areas and just those projects that provide the largest benefit, biggest bang for the buck. These charts just break down some of the money that we need and that we've spent. We estimate that the cost to fully repair the watershed at Cameron Peak is over $100 million, just a huge sum. And again, this is just one of many fires in the state. To date, thankfully, we've secured about $22 million. And of that amount, about half came from the state through Senate Bill 21240. And we are incredibly grateful for that bill and for the administration of that through CWCB. CWCB has been extremely helpful and responsive. We are also putting local dollars to work, local dollars collected from our water customers and from private donations. Excuse me, let me go back. This coming year, we don't expect as much money from the state. We're expecting more money from the feds, but nowhere near the $80 million that we need. So again, of that, we have an $80 million need outstanding. Of that, we've identified $45 million in priority projects that we would like to get done in 2022. These are shovel-ready projects that will have the greatest benefit. And we have the capacity to complete most, if not all, these projects before the summer monsoon season here later in July and August. We can spend money very fast when it's $87 a minute per helicopter. If we can get these in before the monsoon, we can protect our water supplies and downstream communities from flooding. We're pursuing federal funding for these projects, but to date we have no funding secured. We're told the U.S. Forest Service will be allocating $6 million and even up to $14 million from a emergency supplemental attached to a continuing resolution last September. But nothing is guaranteed at this point. We're also hoping to secure some additional money from CWCB. But even if all that money comes through, which is a big maybe, it's certainly not nearly enough. We also have calculated just for Greeley our cost of doing nothing, and that's over $130 million. And again, that's just Greeley. All the other cities up here are going to have significantly additional cost if nothing is done. So we have a long way to go, but we're optimistic that we can, help repair this watershed and avoid more disasters, the disasters that are imminent from this post-fire landscape. And I invite you all to look at a website from our Watershed Coalition. It's poudrewatershed.org/Cameron Peak Fire. So thank you.
Adam, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Just tremendous images and numbers. And thank you for your great work helping to protect the watershed post-fire, and just really appreciate your time presenting this morning as well. I'm going to wrap us up here just for a little brief section of my presentation here. We have heard from our previous presenters, that indeed watersheds support all of us. In fact, in Colorado's water plan, it reports that 80% of our state's drinking water comes from forested watersheds. Additionally, riverside habitats critically support upwards of 80% of all of Colorado's birds and other wildlife during some portion of their life cycle. Watersheds do indeed require decades of fuel management, but there are also additional practices that directly support our headwaters and expand our resilience to climate change impacts of both wildfire, debris flows, and flooding. And constituents are certainly paying attention to our wildfire and water issues. From the 2020 Colorado College Conservation in the West poll, 88% of Coloradans polled are concerned about more frequent and severe wildfires. 77% think that wildfires in the West are more of a problem than they were just 10 years ago. And 89% are concerned about droughts and reduced snowpack. Water does connect us. Sometimes it can be opposing sides, but more truthfully, there's more that connects us in water issues than separates. There's rich common ground across sectors. Some common values of our watersheds are healthy flowing rivers, recreation, aesthetic scenery, wildlife watching, reduced flood risk, wildfire mitigation, clean, reliable drinking water, irrigation water, thriving communities and economies. These are core values of water providers, of ranchers and of farmers, of folks that live in cities, wildlife watchers and hunters, Republicans and Democrats, people indeed of all backgrounds and identities. Water is a bipartisan issue. Watersheds are the primary natural infrastructure of our water providers, and watersheds are also the infrastructure that is most threatened by wildfire and other impacts to climate change. The Colorado River Basin is amidst the driest 20-year period in recorded history. It's going on right now. We cannot build our way solely out of this drought or aridification. We do have the opportunity to work with nature to enhance the reliability of great infrastructure or traditional storage projects. In Colorado, there are hundreds of miles of degraded and sized streams that are disconnected from their floodplains. These systems are flashy, and when precipitation comes, they move this water quickly and destructively, down-cutting stream beds and incising channels further. Unfortunately, incised and disconnected and simplified stream channels are very common across all the Western states. There are many benefits, when we work with nature, there are many benefits, multiple benefits of ecosystem services for people and improved ecology for nature. Improved water security and ecological functioning that support greater resilience to wildfire, drought, and flood risks for both people and nature alike. So here's what the benefits look like. They don't happen overnight, but they do. By re-wetting the sponge of the riverscape, so to speak, soil moisture, productivity, and resiliency are all improved, essentially turning a dry gully to this resilient natural water infrastructure. And when beavers move in, let's look at what happens to freshwater systems and with and without beaver ponds here. Riparian areas are burnt to the ground in the back of this picture. They're completely to the ground except where beavers were present. This slide illustrates the complicated kind of scientific phenomenon that water does not burn. And beaver wetlands even survived Colorado's largest wildfire, the Cameron Peak Fire, and continue to provide critical water quality and wildlife habitat functions, which is a real weighty win-win. I encourage you to take a look at the article that we co-authored with Dr. Emily Fairfax on this beaver pond complex. The link is in the bottom of the slide, and I believe it'll be in the chat as well. In addition to an informational Q&A blog with Dr. Fairfax, you will see a short video of stunning aerial footage we captured of this beaver wetland complex in stark contrast to the surrounding charred landscape. Despite the burnt landscape, the water in the beaver pond complex flows clear due to high ecological function of that wet meadow. More and more is being known and appreciated about these kind of low-tech process-based restoration practices and how beavers and wet meadow complexes provide immense benefits to water quality by filtering pollutants and sediment and to the resilience of extremes of wildfire and drought. How can we work at a scale and affordably address these degraded stream systems? Working with natural stream process techniques, it is possible to cost-effectively rehabilitate incised streams and reconnect them with their floodplains in areas that historically had beaver but no longer can support them from a variety of reasons. Using these low-tech methods, people can restore wet meadow processes that are about 10 times less expensive than traditional river restoration methods. These low-tech processes work similarly to natural processes that beavers catalyze in wetland and wet meadow complexes. Process-based restoration methods benefit rivers and communities by restoring natural river processes like hydrology and sediment movement and nutrient cycling by reconnecting these deeply incised streams with their floodplains and adjacent wetlands if historically present. The benefits of restoring floodplains work for people and nature from the top of the watershed to the bottom. And taking care of natural watershed systems really takes care of all of us and, you know, breaks down the water user silos. This is not just an environmental practice. This is a key practice that water supply infrastructure. Watersheds are indeed our primary natural water supply infrastructure. And we have an urgency to scale up our resilience to climate change in pre-wildfire preparedness, post-wildfire recovery, and both in drought and flood. All of us depend on natural systems for clean and reliable water. When we invest in the health of Colorado's watersheds and rivers, we invest in our resilience to climate change. So I acknowledge that we are at time that we allotted for our moment. I would like to invite Director Gibbs for any closing comments in this space of watersheds. And I apologize that we will not have time for Q&A today, but we certainly will have this recording available to registrants. So Director Gibbs, may I turn it over to you for some closing remarks?
Sure. Thanks, Abby. Can you all hear me all right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. As you all know, Colorado is famous for its locally driven collaborative water planning process. Many of you have been involved with your own basin roundtables around the state. But last October, I stepped into the role of the Interbasin Compact Committee Director position, which is definitely a big challenge, especially since I took over for Russ George, who's a great mentor of mine. But the work across divides and interests on strategies to ensure that our farms, our cities, our landscapes will thrive for generations to come is so important now more than ever. I visited the roundtables around the state. Most of them have been virtual right now, but I'm continuing to be engaged with them. And I couldn't be more excited as I look at these basin implementation plans, that I'm starting to see some emerging themes on the importance of advancing forest and watershed health initiatives. So this is, these are themes I'm seeing, throughout the state of Colorado, which is just really exciting to say the least. And I believe as water supplies grow scarcer and climate impacts grow more acute, Coloradans know that it's the best interest to preserve and protect our water source now more than ever. At the CWCB's water plan workshop last January, I mentioned the need to drop the word versus from the water plan vocabulary. So no more, rural versus urban or front range versus west slope. And I know that's not always easy because it's easy to throw those terms out there, but there's always room for disagreements when it comes to water, as we all know. But the water community overall in Colorado has really shown how water planning and throughout the West should really be done. You heard from Adam earlier on everything that they are doing on the back end of fires. That's just extraordinary to see. And I know the federal partners and me as a state partner will be there in the future. So we need to have a water policy that's together and leaving no one behind. And I really think that's what we're trying to do here in Colorado. So again, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Director Gibbs, thank you. What wonderful words to end our presentation on. Thank you so much. And I want to also thank my co-panelists as well, and to your audience for sharing your morning to learn more about Colorado's watersheds. I hope you found this information useful and certainly do welcome your feedback. Again, apologies that we have gone over time and that we don't have a moment to address Q&A, but I do want to make sure that we do acknowledge that we are planning another water legislator webinar, which will be towards the latter part of April, and we'll be looking at some of the Colorado River issues, as well as the Colorado water planning processes. We are lining up our speakers as we speak, and we'll certainly be sending out an email notification of when we have our sessions secured. So again, thank you all for sharing your morning with us, and thank you again, co-panelists and presenters, and thank you all. Have a great day.